In this video, we delve into a compelling narrative that explores the complexities of political identity, public perception, and the pursuit of justice. The story follows a protester wearing a MAGA hat who is assaulted at a rally, only to later be revealed as a civil rights lawyer. This revelation challenges preconceived notions and highlights the nuanced realities individuals face when their personal beliefs intersect with their professional commitments. Through this journey, we examine themes of empathy, understanding, and the importance of looking beyond surface-level judgments to uncover the deeper truths that define us. The scene opens with a tumultuous crowd, a city square filled with protesters on both sides of a political divide. It's a crisp morning, the sun is barely up, and already the air is thick with tension. People have gathered to voice their opinions, and the political landscape feels more divided than ever. On one side of the street, signs and chants fill the air, demanding change. On the other, more voices raise in protest, equally passionate but equally filled with anger. It's not just a protest. It's a battlefield, a war of words, symbols, and values. Among the protesters stands one man. He is just another face in the crowd, but his attire stands out. Wearing a red MAGA hat, a symbol of the far-right movement that has taken root in the nation. He walks calmly, his face unreadable. He doesn't shout. He doesn't hold signs. He simply observes. Perhaps this was his intention from the start, just to see, just to understand what's going on around him. But his choice of clothing has made him a target. The protest around him grows more intense, with voices rising in volume. Chants of no justice, no peace, clash with Make America Great Again. As the two groups draw closer, an uncomfortable silence settles over the crowd for a moment. It's not just the protests that are loud anymore, but the sense of looming conflict. It's clear that passions are running high, and the protester with the MAGA hat is caught right in the middle. At first, nothing happens. The man continues walking, his expression stoic. But as he gets closer to the center of the rally, something shifts. A person in the crowd locks eyes with him. A woman, wearing a pink shirt, steps forward with a scowl on her face. She has no idea who this man is, but the red MAGA hat is enough to ignite her fury. Without a word, she shoves him hard in the chest. The man stumbles back but catches his balance, taken aback. "Not welcome here," the woman shouts as she pushes again. This time, she is joined by a few others, each person shoving him aside with venomous glares and harsh words. The crowd starts to stir, and it seems like a mob mentality is taking over. A handful of others around the man start shouting at him, accusing him of standing for everything that is wrong with the country. The chants grow louder. "Leave. Go back where you came from." But the man stands his ground, not saying a word. His expression remains unchanged, even as more people close in on him. It isn't just words anymore. The insults turn physical. One protester, a young man, rushes forward, knocking the MAGA hat off the man's head, sending it tumbling to the ground. The woman from earlier is quick to step in, picking the hat up and stomping on it. "You don't belong here," she says, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and self-righteousness. The man remains calm, his face a mask of stoicism. His eyes dart around, his mind racing for a solution, but he doesn't fight back. Instead, he looks around, searching for help. But the scene has escalated too quickly. The voices grow louder, and the protest turns from an exchange of ideas into an open confrontation. The man takes a step back, still refusing to engage in the violence that surrounds him. The situation reaches its boiling point when one of the protesters, a middle-aged man in a black hoodie, takes things further. He pushes the man hard in the chest, knocking him to the ground. For a moment, time seems to freeze. The man is on his back, sprawled out on the pavement, his red MAGA hat still lying a few feet away. The crowd around him is a mix of jeers and cheers. Some people shouting in agreement with the assault, others telling the aggressors to stop. But the damage is done. The man lies on the ground, the weight of the situation sinking in. What happens next is a blur. Police officers on standby rush to the scene, their sirens blaring as they push through the crowd. The protesters scatter in different directions, some trying to defuse the situation, others egging on the police. The man, still on the ground, looks dazed but not injured beyond the immediate shock. His clothes are wrinkled, and there's a tear on his jacket from the scuffle. But he gets to his feet, brushing himself off. The police officer who approaches him looks concerned but stern. He asks if he's all right, and the man nods, though his eyes show no sign of relief. They're not just concerned for his physical well-being, they are already assessing the situation through the lens of the law. This could quickly escalate into an arrest or a larger altercation. As the police begin to take down statements from witnesses, it's clear that no one really knows who the man in the MAGA hat is or why he was targeted. The camera zooms in on his face as he's asked by an officer to identify himself. "Can you tell me your name, sir?" the officer asks, his tone professional yet inquisitive. The man takes a deep breath before answering, his calm demeanor unshaken by the chaos around him. He says his name softly, David Wilson, but it carries weight in the moment. It's a name no one in the crowd recognizes, but one that will soon be revealed in an entirely different context. At first, the onlookers and police are left in the dark. Some of the crowd members still throw accusatory glances, convinced he is just another supporter of a divisive political movement. The officers, still assessing the situation, begin to turn their attention to the individuals who have escalated the conflict, focusing on the assailants. But as they continue to process the incident, something catches their attention. A bystander nearby has pulled out their phone and begun searching for the man's name. A quick search on social media reveals David Wilson's true identity. He's not just another protester. He is someone much more influential. As the crowd slowly disperses and the police try to make sense of the situation, a journalist approaches, asking the man if he would be willing to speak about the incident. He declines, still focused on getting through the moment. But the journalist's curiosity lingers, especially after the social media revelation. She knows that this isn't just a random protester, it's someone who has a history that goes far beyond the rally. This seemingly ordinary moment will soon turn into something much more significant, something that will challenge perceptions and reveal the stark reality of the fractured political landscape. The incident, while violent and divisive, holds a story far beyond the physical altercation. The story of the man in the MAGA hat is just beginning, and the crowd doesn't yet know who they've just assaulted. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the city streets as David Wilson, the man in the MAGA hat, sat alone in a sterile hospital room. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound that accompanied his thoughts. His body bore the marks of the assault bruises, a swollen cheek, and a cut above his eyebrow. But it was the emotional toll that weighed heaviest on him. He had been a silent observer, a passive participant in a world that seemed to be growing more divided by the day. Yet, in that moment, he felt the full force of that division. As the door creaked open, a nurse entered, her face a mask of professional concern. She checked his vitals, adjusted the fur drip, and offered a reassuring smile. "You're healing well," she said softly. "The doctor will be in shortly to discuss your discharge." With that, she exited, leaving David alone with his thoughts once more. His mind wandered back to the rally, to the faces in the crowd, to the shouts and jeers. He had attended many protests in his time, but this one felt different. The animosity was palpable, the lines drawn so sharply that there seemed to be no room for dialogue, no space for understanding. He had hoped to witness a peaceful exchange of ideas, but instead, he had been thrust into the heart of a storm. The incident had been swift. One moment, he was standing, observing, and the next, he was on the ground, the world spinning around him. The pain was intense, but it was the betrayal that stung the most. He had dedicated his life to fighting for justice, for the rights of the marginalized, and yet, here he was, a victim of the very intolerance he had spent decades combating. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. A familiar face appeared, Detective Sarah Mitchell, a colleague from his days as a civil rights attorney. She stepped in, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "David," she began, her voice steady, "how are you holding up?" He managed a weak smile. "I've been better," he replied, his voice hoarse. "But I'll survive." Sarah pulled up a chair and sat beside him. "I heard about what happened," she said, her tone laced with disbelief. "I can't believe someone would do that to you." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not the first time I've faced hostility for my beliefs," he said. "But this was different. It was personal." Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed. We need to find out who did this, she said firmly. And we will. You have my word. David appreciated her resolve, but he knew the road ahead would be challenging. The city was on edge, tensions running high. The rally had been a flashpoint, and the aftermath was a volatile mix of anger, fear, and confusion. He had been a part of many movements, but this one felt different. The lines between right and wrong, good and evil, had become blurred, and he wasn't sure where he stood anymore. As Sarah left to begin her investigation, David was left alone with his thoughts once more. He thought about his career, his passion for justice, and the countless cases he had fought. He had always believed in the power of the law and the idea that truth would prevail. But now, he wasn't so sure. The world was changing, and not for the better. The ideals he had fought for seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a growing tide of division and hatred. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise of the world. He needed to rest, to heal. But more than that, he needed to find a way to bridge the gap, to heal the wounds that had been inflicted not just on him, but on the entire community. He had spent his life fighting for justice, but now he realized the fight was much bigger than he had ever imagined. The next few days were a blur. Detective Mitchell kept him updated on the progress of the investigation, but leads were scarce. The crowd at the rally had been large, and many of the faces were unfamiliar. Without clear evidence, identifying the assailant was proving difficult. David felt a sense of helplessness creeping in. He had always been the one to seek justice, to stand up for the oppressed. Now, he was the one in need of protection. As he sat in his hospital room, staring out the window at the city skyline, he reflected on his journey. He had come to the city years ago, a young idealist eager to make a difference. He had fought for civil rights, for equality, for the voiceless. He had won cases, changed laws, and given hope to many. But now, he wondered if it had all been in vain. The city he had once loved seemed unrecognizable, consumed by a darkness he hadn't anticipated. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. A young man entered, holding a bouquet of flowers. "Mr. Wilson?" he asked hesitantly. "I'm sorry to intrude, but I wanted to thank you." David raised an eyebrow, confused. "Thank me? For what?" The young man smiled nervously. "For standing up for what's right," he said. "I saw what happened at the rally. I know it wasn't easy, but you did it anyway. You're an inspiration." David was taken aback. He had never considered himself a hero, just someone doing his job. But here was this young man, looking up to him, drawing strength from his actions. It was a humbling moment, a reminder of why he had chosen this path in the first place. "Thank you," David said softly. "That means more to me than you know." As the young man left, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, but he wasn't alone. There were others who shared his vision, who believed in justice and equality. Together, they could make a difference. Together, they could heal the wounds that had been inflicted. The investigation continued, but progress was slow. The city remained on edge, the scars of the rally still fresh. David knew that healing would take time, but he was committed to the cause. He would not let this incident define him. He would continue to fight for what was right, for what was just, because that was who he was, a civil rights lawyer, dedicated to the pursuit of justice, no matter the cost. As the days turned into weeks, David's condition improved. He was discharged from the hospital and returned to his apartment. But the sense of unease lingered. The city was changing, and not for the better. The ideals he had fought for seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a growing tide of division and hatred. But he refused to give up. He would continue to fight, to stand up for what was right, because that was who he was, a civil rights lawyer, dedicated to the pursuit of justice, no matter the cost. In the quiet of his apartment, David sat at his desk, reviewing case files. The phone rang, breaking the silence. He picked it up, recognizing the number. It was Sarah. "David," she said, her voice tense. "We have a lead." The city was a cacophony of sounds, the distant hum of traffic, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional shout of protest. David Wilson sat in his modest apartment, the walls adorned with framed photographs of civil rights marches, courtroom victories, and moments of personal triumph. The room was a testament to a life dedicated to justice, equality, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Yet, today, it felt like a prison. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his reverie. It was a message from Sarah Mitchell. "We have a lead." His heart skipped a beat. The investigation into the assault at the rally had been slow, with few leads and many dead ends. This could be the breakthrough they needed. He quickly dialed Sarah's number. "Sarah, it's David. I got your message." "What's the lead?" "Meet me at the usual spot," she replied tersely. "I'll explain everything." David grabbed his coat and headed out, the weight of the world pressing down on him. As he walked through the city streets, memories of his past cases flooded his mind. He had fought for the oppressed, challenged unjust laws, and stood as a beacon of hope for many. But now, he was the one in need of help. Arriving at the small cafe where he and Sarah often met, he spotted her sitting in a corner booth, her face obscured by a newspaper. He approached and slid into the seat across from her. "What's this about a lead?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah folded the newspaper, revealing a photograph of the rally. "We found this," she said, sliding the photo across the table. It showed a man in a red MAGA hat standing amidst the chaos, his face partially obscured by a crowd. "We believe this is the person who assaulted you." David studied the photo, his brow furrowing. "I don't recognize him," he said, shaking his head. "But then again, I didn't recognize the woman who attacked me either." Sarah nodded. "That's the problem. We can't identify him. But there's something else." She handed him a folder. "This is a list of attendees at the rally. We cross-referenced it with local civil rights organizations. One name stood out, Marcus Thompson." David's eyes widened. "Marcus Thompson? He's a well-known activist. I've worked with him on several cases." "Exactly," Sarah said. "But here's the twist. Marcus Thompson is an alias. His real name is David Wilson." David recoiled. "What? That's impossible." "I'm David Wilson." Sarah leaned in, her voice urgent. "I know this is hard to believe, but the evidence is clear. Your name, your background, your history, all of it matches. Someone has been using your identity." David sat back, stunned. "But why? Why would someone do this?" Sarah sighed. "We don't know yet, but we need to find out. This could be bigger than we think." David's mind raced. The implications were staggering. Someone had been impersonating him, using his name and reputation to infiltrate civil rights circles. But who and why? The questions swirled, each one more perplexing than the last. As he left the cafe, David felt a sense of unease settle over him. The city, once a place of hope and justice, now felt like a labyrinth of deception and betrayal. He had dedicated his life to fighting for the truth, but now the truth seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Back in his apartment, David pored over old case files, photographs, and documents. He searched for any clue, any connection that could explain the impersonation. Hours passed, and the pile of papers grew, but the answers remained elusive. Exhausted, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts drifted to his late mentor, Professor Eleanor Hayes. She had been a guiding light in his life, teaching him the importance of integrity, justice, and the relentless pursuit of truth. He had promised her he would always stand for what was right, but now he felt lost. His phone buzzed again, snapping him from his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. "We need to talk, urgent." David's heart sank. He quickly dialed her number. "Sarah, what's going on?" "We've uncovered something," she said, her voice tense. "Meet me at the office now." He grabbed his coat and rushed out, his mind racing. What had they found? What new revelation awaited him? At the office, Sarah was waiting, her face pale. "David, I don't know how to say this, but we found a video." David's stomach churned. "A video of what?" "Of you," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "At the rally. But it's not you. It's someone else. Someone who looks exactly like you." David's mind reeled. "What are you saying? Are you suggesting I'm the one who assaulted myself?" Sarah shook her head. "No, but someone is using your identity, and they're doing it to discredit you, to destroy everything you've worked for." David felt the ground shift beneath him. His life, his career, his very identity were being torn apart by an imposter. He had always believed in the power of truth, but now the truth seemed to be a distant memory. As he left the office, David felt a sense of determination rise within him. He would not let this imposter win. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. He had spent his life fighting for justice, and now he would fight for his own. The city streets were dark and empty as David walked. his footsteps echoing in the silence. He felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, but he also felt a spark of hope. He had faced adversity before, and he had always emerged stronger. This time would be no different. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with obstacles and challenges. But he was ready. He would uncover the imposter, expose the truth, and restore his name, because that was who he was, a civil rights lawyer, dedicated to the pursuit of justice, no matter the cost. As he approached his apartment building, David noticed a figure standing in the shadows. He tensed, his instincts on high alert. The figure stepped forward, revealing a familiar face. "David," the man said, his voice cold. "We need to talk." The days following the assault were a blur for David. The physical injuries had healed, but the emotional scars lingered. He found himself questioning everything he had stood for, the ideals he had dedicated his life to. The world seemed more divided than ever, and he felt like a stranger in his own city. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, the phone rang. It was Sarah. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. He agreed to meet her at their usual spot, a small cafe nestled in a quiet corner of the city. As he arrived, he noticed a group of young activists gathered outside, holding signs and chanting slogans. The sight was both familiar and alien to him. He had once been part of such movements, but now he felt disconnected, as if he were observing from the outside. Inside the cafe, Sarah was waiting. She gestured for him to sit. "What's going on?" David asked, his voice weary. Sarah handed him a newspaper. The headline read, "Civil Rights Lawyer Attacked at Rally." Beneath it was a photograph of David, his face bruised and swollen, being helped by paramedics. "Your story is making headlines," Sarah said. "People are talking." David sighed. "I never wanted this kind of attention. I just wanted to make a difference." Sarah nodded. "I know. But maybe this is the wake-up call we all needed. The division, the hatred, it's real. And it's affecting everyone, even those who have dedicated their lives to bridging the gap." David stared at the photograph, his mind racing. "I thought I was doing enough. I thought my work in the courtroom, my advocacy, it was making a difference. But now, I see that it's not enough. The world is changing, and not for the better." Sarah reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "David, you've always been a beacon of hope. Maybe it's time to lead again, but in a different way. Use your experience, your story, to bring people together." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "But how? How do we bridge this divide when it feels like the chasm is widening every day?" Sarah smiled faintly. "One conversation at a time. One act of kindness. One moment of understanding. It starts with us." David nodded slowly. He had always believed in the power of dialogue, in the ability of people to come together despite their differences. Perhaps it was time to rekindle that belief. Over the next few weeks, David embarked on a journey of self-discovery and healing. He attended community meetings, engaged in dialogues with individuals from diverse backgrounds, and shared his story. The response was overwhelming. People listened, empathized, and, in many cases, shared their own experiences of division and misunderstanding. One evening, at a town hall meeting, David stood before a crowd of hundreds. He shared his experience at the rally, the assault, and the subsequent revelations. He spoke of the pain of being targeted for his beliefs, but also of the hope he found in the support of strangers who became allies. As he finished, a young woman approached him. "Thank you," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "I've been so angry, so lost. Your story gives me hope that we can find common ground." David smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "We can," he replied. "But it starts with us. It starts with understanding, with listening, with being willing to see the humanity in each other." The town hall became a turning point. It sparked a series of community initiatives aimed at fostering dialogue and understanding. Workshops were held, bringing together individuals from opposing sides to discuss their differences and find common ground. The media, once focused on the sensational aspects of the story, began to highlight these efforts, showcasing the power of reconciliation and the importance of empathy. David continued his work as a civil rights lawyer, but now his approach was different. He integrated conflict resolution and community engagement into his practice, believing that true justice encompassed not only legal victories, but also the healing of societal wounds. Months later, As he stood before a judge, advocating for a marginalized community, he felt a sense of peace. The courtroom was still a battleground, but it was also a place where understanding could be forged, where bridges could be built. As he left the courthouse, Sarah was waiting for him. "How did it go?" she asked. David smiled. "We won. But more importantly, we made a difference." Sarah chuckled. "I knew you would." They walked down the steps together, the city bustling around them. The world was still divided, but David believed that change was possible. It started with one person, one act of kindness, one conversation at a time. And as he looked around, he saw that he was not alone. There were others, like Sarah, like the young woman at the town hall, who were committed to bridging the divide. Together, they would continue the work, knowing that the path to understanding was long, but worth every step. In the end, David realized that the true measure of justice was not in legal victories or accolades, but in the ability to bring people together to heal divisions and to create a community where every individual was valued and heard. And with that understanding, he knew his journey was far from over. It was just beginning. The city had always been a place of contrasts, towering skyscrapers, casting long shadows over humble neighborhoods, bustling streets teeming with diverse faces, and a cacophony of voices, each with its own story. For David Wilson, the city was more than just a backdrop. It was a living, breathing entity that had shaped his journey. Yet, in recent times, it had become a place of dissonance, where the harmony he once cherished seemed to be slipping away. As he sat in his apartment, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on him, David reflected on the events that had unfolded. The assault at the rally, the revelation of the imposter, and the subsequent journey of self-discovery had shaken him to his core. He had always believed in the power of justice, in the idea that truth would prevail. But now, he questioned whether those ideals were enough in a world that seemed increasingly divided. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah, meeting at the community center. 6 p.m. Be there. David stood up, a sense of purpose replacing the uncertainty that had clouded his mind. He had been avoiding the community center, unsure of how to face the people who had once looked up to him. But now, he realized that avoiding them was not the answer. He needed to confront the situation head-on to be the leader they needed. Arriving at the community center, David was greeted by familiar faces, activists, community leaders, and residents who had been part of his journey. They were gathered in a circle, their expressions a mix of concern and hope. As he entered, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him. "David," Sarah said, her voice warm. "Thank you for coming." He nodded, taking a seat at the center of the circle. "I owe you all an apology," he began, his voice steady. "For the past few weeks, I've been lost, questioning everything I believed in. But I've come to realize that the fight for justice doesn't end with a single case or a courtroom victory. It's a continuous journey, and I need to be part of it again." A murmur of approval rippled through the group. Sarah smiled. "We're glad to have you back." The meeting that followed was a turning point. They discussed strategies to bridge the growing divide in the community, to foster understanding and empathy among different groups. David shared his experiences, the lessons he had learned, and the insights he had gained. Together, they formulated a plan to initiate dialogues, workshops, and community events aimed at healing the rifts that had formed. In the end, David realized that the true measure of justice was not in legal victories or accolades, but in the ability to bring people together to heal divisions and to create a community where every individual was valued and heard. And with that understanding, he knew his journey was far from over. It was just beginning. The city had always been a place of contrasts, towering skyscrapers, casting long shadows over humble neighborhoods, bustling streets teeming with diverse faces, and a cacophony of voices, each with its own story. For David Wilson, the city was more than just a backdrop. It was a living, breathing entity that had shaped his journey. Yet, in recent times, it had become a place of dissonance, where the harmony he once cherished seemed to be slipping away. As he sat in his apartment, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on him, David reflected on the events that had unfolded. The assault at the rally, the revelation of the imposter, and the subsequent journey of self-discovery had shaken him to his core. He had always believed in the power of justice, in the idea that truth would prevail. But now, he questioned whether those ideals were enough in a world that seemed increasingly divided. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah, meeting at the community center. 6 p.m. be there. David stood up, a sense of purpose replacing the uncertainty that had clouded his mind. He had been avoiding the community center, unsure of how to face the people who had once looked up to him. But now, he realized that avoiding them was not the answer. He needed to confront the situation head-on to be the leader they needed. Arriving at the community center, David was greeted by familiar faces, activists, community leaders, and residents who had been part of his journey. They were gathered in a circle, their expressions a mix of concern and hope. As he entered, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him. "David," Sarah said, her voice warm. "Thank you for coming." He nodded, taking a seat at the center of the circle. "I owe you all an apology," he began, his voice steady. "For the past few weeks, I've been lost, questioning everything I believed in. But I've come to realize that the fight for justice doesn't end with a single case or a courtroom victory. It's a continuous journey, and I need to be part of it again." A murmur of approval rippled through the group. Sarah smiled. "We're glad to have you back." The meeting that followed was a turning point. They discussed strategies to bridge the growing divide in the community, to foster understanding and empathy among different groups. David shared his experiences, the lessons he had learned, and the insights he had gained. Together, they formulated a plan to initiate dialogues, workshops, and community events aimed at healing the rifts that had formed. As the meeting adjourned, David felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in weeks. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was no longer alone. He had allies, friends, and a community that believed in the same ideals he did. The following days were filled with activity. David and the team organized town hall meetings, inviting people from all walks of life to share their stories and listen to others. The turnout was overwhelming. People were eager to talk, to be heard, and to understand. The conversations were difficult at times, emotions running high, but they were necessary. Slowly, the walls of division began to crumble. One evening, as David walked home from a meeting, he noticed a group of teenagers standing on the corner, their faces tense, their postures defensive. He approached them, offering a friendly smile. "Hey," he said, "mind if I join you?" The teens looked at each other, then shrugged. "Sure," one of them said. They stood together, talking about their lives, their dreams, and their frustrations. David listened more than he spoke, allowing them to express themselves. By the end of the conversation, the tension had dissipated, replaced by a sense of mutual respect. As he continued his walk, David realized that this was what he had been missing: a connection with people, a shared humanity. The city was still a place of contrasts, but now it felt more like a community, a place where understanding and empathy could flourish. Weeks turned into months, and the efforts to heal the community bore fruit. The dialogues continued, the workshops expanded, and the sense of unity grew stronger. David's role as a civil rights lawyer evolved. He was no longer just an advocate in the courtroom. He was a mediator, a bridge builder, a leader. One afternoon, as he sat in his office, reviewing a case file, there was a knock on the door. He looked up to see a young woman standing in the doorway, holding a folder. "Mr. Wilson?" she asked hesitantly. He smiled. "Come in. How can I help you?" She stepped forward, placing the folder on his desk. "I need your help," she said. "I want to make a difference, like you did." David's heart swelled with pride. "Let's talk," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. As they discussed the case, David realized that the work was never truly done. There would always be challenges, always be injustices to fight. But now, he faced them with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that change was possible, that understanding was achievable. Later that evening, David stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking out over the city. The lights twinkled below, a reflection of the stars above. He thought about the journey he had undertaken, the struggles, the revelations, the growth. He had come full circle, from a man questioning his place in the world to someone who had found his purpose again. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. The city was still a place of contrasts, but now it was a place where hope could thrive, where understanding could flourish, and where justice was not just a concept, but a reality. As he turned to go inside, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The journey was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. Because now, he knew that the fight for justice was not just about winning cases. It was about winning hearts and minds, about building a community where everyone had a voice, and where every voice was heard. And with that understanding, David stepped into the future, ready to continue the work he had always believed in, knowing that the path ahead was one of hope, unity, and unwavering commitment to justice.